Right, welcome everyone. We'll get started here shortly. We'll just give everybody a chance to join. Morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started here momentarily. All right. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And I do apologize for the confusion on the timing. If you saw some of our social media posts and announcements for this webinar, my name is Alex Kron. I am BPOC's Digital Operations and Collections Information Analyst. Normally here with me is Nick Honeysett, BPOC CEO, but he is traveling to the Museum Next conference this week. If you're attending, be sure to stop by and say hello to him and watch our presentation on our Escape Balboa Park project. For those who are joining us for the first time, BPOC is a nonprofit tech consultancy. We provide IT support, digital strategy, strategic planning consulting services, and more. We're based out of San Diego, California, but we work with clients inside and outside of the US. We have been hosting free technology webinars since late 2020 to help facilitate current and ongoing discussions about the technologies that we use in museums, libraries, archives, and galleries. You can check out recordings from our past webinars on our YouTube channel and learn more about BPOC on our website. Before we go ahead and get started, I want to mention that we have Zoom captioning available as well as Otter.ai transcription in the upper left-hand corner if you need captions or transcriptions. Please put any questions that you have in the Q&A section. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. As part of our Dreaming of AI webinar series, we're conducting a survey on current AI usage in the cultural heritage field. I'm going to put that link to the survey in the chat, and I'll share the survey link again when we promote the webinar recording. The survey results and what is discussed during this webinar series will be summarized in a report and published across BPOC's social media channels and on our website. In addition to our survey, we're building a shared document for AI resources, including policies, guidance, educational resources, learning opportunities, and resources, of course, shared by our guest speakers on the series. I will go ahead and add that link in the chat too here shortly. Today we have Dr. Paul Fishwick with us, Distinguished Emeritus Chair of Arts, Humanities, and Technology at the University of Texas at Dallas and CEO of Metaphors LLC. Paul, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you for your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex, and thank you to all of the listeners who taking a little bit of time out of your day. Glad to have you. Is it? Am I being projected? I guess is the question.
Yes.
Can you see?
Good
Okay.
to go, Paul.
Okay, great. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about AI is part of the series that Alex and Nick are doing. And so I'll mention that as a technology toward the end, but I really want to start out the discussion with some of what I'm trying to do here, what I'm trying to promote, and then aspects of just focusing on people, just focusing on all the people that we know and what we do when we go to museums or we look at objects. So we'll start out with my own. This is a personal journey. All of you have your own journey. And mine has been kind of connected with this talk. So I used to look out the window of an airplane. This is looking at the city of Dallas from across the Trinity River, which is in the lower part of the image. But I mean, I used to look at that and I used to sort of dream. I didn't dream of AI. I dreamed of how could I look at this from the standpoint of computer science and information science? So it's like I'm looking at a cityscape, but as a computer scientist, I'm seeing all these interesting configurations and structures that are similar to what I do when I program or I do software. Okay. And so I got into this sort of way of thinking and way of looking by saying, gee, things that I'm looking at, how could I reinterpret that using computer science and programming terms? Now, why did I do that? I have no idea. No, I'm serious. It's something that as a computer scientist, I sort of see computer science everywhere. And in this talk, I'm going to be getting to the idea of seeing almost every academic or school subject everywhere. But I'm starting with computer science since that's kind of the beginning of my journey. So I'm not going to go over this in detail other than to say on the right is a flow chart, on the left is what I was looking at. So I was looking at a lamp in my living room, and when I, played around with the lamp in terms of turning it on and off and so on, I realized that really what I was engaging with was a flow chart on the right. And the flow chart describes the logic of the lamp. And as a way of when you look at the lamp, when I look at that object, I can envision the flow chart on the right side of the screen. Similarly, when I was outside eating lunch, and this is at the university, I would start looking at things like the building and, naturally seeing kind of an array structure. And don't worry if this is too technical. It's just meant to show that if I'm seeing computing in what I'm looking at, array is is an aspect of computing. And then if I look at the people, they represent these structures called trees. Now, tree is just like what you would see outside, but computer scientists use that word tree to represent an abstract math structure that captures this. It captures a person. This person, you're looking at sort of the skeleton of a person, and this is the kind of thing that is used all the time when people make films and do computer graphics. They have to represent synthetic people in some cases, and those synthetic people have structures that look like this. And, I could look at the table next to me and I could see the table, but as a computer scientist, I could also see the process that may have occurred to create the table. So seeing an object as a process. And these are just some boxes that tie together, and you can imagine that to be, it is a definition of a process, kind of like a flow chart. I worked with the Dallas Museum of Art while I was there in Dallas, and I really liked an Inca exhibit. And the Inca exhibit had a tunic right in front. And I got a chance, I was lucky to be able to talk to the curator and learned a lot about this. And so what I started thinking is, okay, I'm at the museum, I'm looking at this Inca tunic. Now I want to put on my hat, my computer science hat, or if you like the metaphor of lens, I want to wear computer science lenses as I'm looking around. So I want to look at that and see, God, how would this tie into computing? Well, one way is using a concept map or a concept model. And you may have seen these sorts of models before. They look a bit like this. There may be some pictures, there's some descriptions, and it's a way of sort of tying all the knowledge about the Inca together with respect to the tunic in particular and how it's made, and create a picture like this. A couple of other things. This, believe it or not, I mean, you look at this, and if you're not a computing person, I imagine most people aren't, you'd go, I kind of get this. Hey, here's how, you shear the alpaca, then there's spinning of the wool, there's the dyeing of the wool, and then there's the weaving, which is done by someone that is an Incan. And so But this is actually, if you dive into it in terms of computing, this is a way we think and a way we represent process. It's one way to represent process. In this case, the process of shearing and ultimately ending up with something like the tunic. This is another kind of process. Again, you don't need to be a computer geek in order to kind of get this and how it works. But take it from me that the computer geeks are using these kinds of diagrams, probably not with pictures, but they're using this stuff. So this is a way of looking at the tunic and understanding it from a computing standpoint. And I presented some of this at the Museum of the Web conference in 2016. So if anyone's interested, I could certainly point you to that paper I presented in Los Angeles. I talked with some people at the Perot Science Museum, as well as the Dallas Museum of Art, showing how when you look at this sculpture in the DMA, in the Dallas Museum of Art, how can you interpret it? Now, in this particular case, I'm branching beyond looking at everything as computing and just saying, gosh, there's a lot of stuff here. There's evidence of sand. There's quartz, and this is this object right here. There's some engineering, believe it or not, because the story behind this fascinating sculpture is one that involves being able to control the tides with this object. And Lord Kelvin, back in the 19th century, had a tide machine. So this is kind of a way of bringing engineering into the discussion, as well as the material bronze, which is the metal used here. So there's lots of subjects that can be taught and can be thought about when looking in the museum at this object. Certainly, the art of Japanese. This was in the Japanese area, the Asian area. You certainly would learn a lot of that, but there's a lot of other subjects you can learn as well. Liz Larner is an artist, is a sculptor who produced a couple of 2 or 3 different sculptures for the Nasher Museum, which is also in Dallas. And so what I thought is I'd gather a bunch of people around the university. I'd say, what is your model? What is your interpretation of this object? And X was the name of the object, which I guess you could see why it would be called an X if you kind of look down upon it. But I gathered those thoughts together. I worked with Bonnie, who's a former director of the DMA, and we put a web page on this idea of having different people say what they thought about X, and those being different interpretations. So I'm going to get to the AI, I promise. Okay, the AI sort of comes a little bit later. But let's talk about people first, because I think people are most important. In my mind, what is fascinating by looking at an object, in this particular case, you're looking at an object of a palm tree. And all these diverse people are looking at the same thing, just as they might look at something in your collection. And the question is, what are they thinking? How do they interpret this? Well, they may interpret it based on personal experience. Some of them may have skills. They may be computer people. They may be historians. They may be geologists. They may be biologists. And they're going to look at this in diverse ways. And in my mind, that's what this talk is all about. And AI turns out to be a technology that can assist us doing that. But this is kind of what this slide is supposed to be about. Okay, so what I'm promoting in this talk is sort of looking closely at objects. I think I used the word deep looking, right? To look at an object in a deep way. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you consider that each object radiates multiple subjects, and these subjects can be clustered together like STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, or they may be just individual subjects. The palm tree we may look at as a computer scientist. The palm tree may look at as a botanist. They're certainly two different ways of looking, but it's, they're different. And to some extent, the objects around us, and for those in museums who are staff in museums right now in this talk, every part of your collection has this rich potential, as you know, to radiate tons of different subjects. Now, we may pick only specific subjects in order to form a narrative around that object. But this talk is sort of where, as we move into AI is a sort of a new technology to assist us in doing that, to make it easier to find these radiants of the object. So certainly subjects are everything that you may have done in school or that you know that people taught something about. And you can imagine it almost like a sun. I'm using the idea of radiance, is that the object is sort of like the sun, and each of the rays are different subject matter which serve as filters for looking at the object. This is very different than, okay, so I'll just use this as an example. It's a place I walk near a beach near me, and this is a palm tree sitting in a very sandy area. In fact, it's the state tree of Florida, sable palm. And what I wanted to do is I went out there and I thought, I'm looking at this palm tree, but I wanted to understand it from the perspective of a member of the Timucua. And if I've said it wrong, please let me know. But the Timucua were people, North American Indians, or natives in North America, who lived in this area, who lived in what we now call Florida and southern Georgia, hundreds of years ago. Now, I wanted to sort of have a Timucuan guide when looking at the tree. So I'm looking at the tree, but I didn't want to use my own personal interpretation of it. I wanted to use, what would the Timucuans say about this tree? Well, it turned out I used AI to figure all of that stuff out. And the Timucuan guide, which is to say ChatGPT, told me tons of stuff about, looking at this tree, which I wouldn't have thought about. Now, to me, that's what's really exciting, is you could say that we're taking the field of anthropology, something we study usually in maybe in high school or college, and that is the radiant I chose to use by saying, ChatGPT, can you be my guide in looking at this object? And this is just a slide just talking about the Timucua, fascinating people, fascinating culture. And again, I just used the latest version of ChatGPT, the 4.0, O being Omni. And I asked many questions, but I first said, you are a Native American, you are Timucuan, have at it. Tell me what I'm looking at. And of course, with something like the technology of ChatGPT 4.0, it's got the ability to look at stuff, through the lens on your smartphone, and say, oh, okay, I'll tell you all about that, Paul, from this perspective. And so that's a way of, now, of course, you could do the same thing with every object in your collection, right? I mean, so that's kind of what I'm sort of leading to. I use the palm tree, but why not have the Timucuan go through your collection and saying, well, this is how this object may fit into my culture. Some objects may not. They may say, what is that? European ship, for example. But it's an interesting idea. So other possible radiants that I've explored, and it could be appropriate to the palm tree, getting back to that, is what is the way to use mathematics as one way of seeing the palm tree? Well, I could say there's a thing called an L system, and it's a formal method used by botanists to understand what they're looking at. And it was created by a botanist who definitely had a penchant for mathematics. What about the insect colonies living on the tree? that is certainly a way of looking, and I wouldn't know very much about it. I'd need to bring a friend along that knows something about insects. And that friend might give me a new perspective on looking at the palm tree. Certainly, if I have a friend who's a physicist, we talk about the kinetic motion, how things drop. For art, if I brought an artist friend along, then we talk about different flora that grow near the beach, palms, palmettos. For the artist, I think an important way of seeing, and this is, I'll get to this for another museum object in a second, but the artist understands the world through making. And this is critical, as this is something I would suggest we all do, right? Very different than, say, that maybe an art historian that is more cultured to studying and scholarship. That's a completely different way of understanding the world than the artist, right? The artist is going to want to understand the world and understand the palm tree through making. The art historian would explore the scholarship and the often text-based description of the object. Of course, biology, the evolution of palm trees and trees in general. So this, I just want you to look at this. So one thing I suggest, and again, this is not about AI, this is about people. Whenever I go to a museum, if I am so fortunate, I seek out the curators, I seek out the educational staff, because they're going to know a lot about their collection. I mean, again, I guess it's obvious to people who work for a museum, but for those of us who don't work for a museum, this is really important to me. I want to know, I want to get different perspectives than I have on what I'm looking at. Now, one of the things I looked at, and Bonnie told me all about this bed. Again, she was director of the DMA for quite a long time. And she went on about how they put this bed in the museum. Well, it turned out to be quite complicated. It had to be taken in pieces because it's so huge. And all the pieces had to be connected together like a jigsaw puzzle, right? And so what I found interesting about Bonnie's perspective was that she was giving an interpretation of this object that may only be known to a very small number of people, right? It's a way of looking at this object almost like a process, or indeed as a process. And this object in particular, the thing why it's interesting is it could have been a presidential bed, but the person it was made for, Clay, I believe, in 19th century United States, didn't become president. So it didn't end up in Washington, D.C., but it did end up at the DMA. Every month, the beginning of the first Saturday every month, I go to a place called Fort Clinch, which is near me. And Fort Clinch was built in the 1840s and then was rapidly rebuilt around the Civil War. And what I really like is I like to talk to these people because either through first-person narrative or third-person narrative, I learn what it's like to live there, what it's like to work there. And so this is just expanding on my excitement of talking to people because they each can see the same object, but completely differently. And so anyway, I just enjoy that. I especially like the first person folks because they're actually living the moment, right? They're not talking about, well, they used to do this and they used to do this. I did this, I'm doing that, right? Which is interesting. Where does this kind of way of seeing come about within things that you can read about? Well, of course, there's this sort of famous book by John Berger, and he had a TV show about ways of singing, pardon me, could be ways of seeing. And then, Berger, I think he kind of came upon different works of art in a certain way. And I would say most of his ways of seeing were sort of oriented towards sociology or social science. However, I think his bigger picture his bigger point was seeing things in many different ways, well beyond sociology. I really like Alexandra Horowitz's book on Looking, where she goes through Manhattan, Central Park, and she walks with different people. She walks with a typographer, someone interested in design of type. She walks with scientists. She walks her dog, and notice the dog is an amazing animal because it can smell so much better than us, right? And so she watches where the dog is focused and how it behaves and so on. So she has 11 different experts she walks with. Awesome. Wouldn't it be great if we could have 11 different experts? You can, okay. I guess the kind of nature of this talk is with AI, which I'm coming to, you can have 11 different eyes, okay? And to some extent, we always had this ability, but I think it's become easier with artificial intelligence. So just a quick note about STEAM. STEAM is an acronym in the talk, and it certainly could be considered a cluster of different ways of seeing: science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and art. Well, it came about because STEM, which doesn't have the A in it, came about around 2001 in sponsorship of NSF and kind of a push to the National Science Foundation. But then STEAM got added, A for art, which I totally am completely on board with, in about 2012. Okay, so my point of STEAM with regard to this talk is that when people look at things, one way of looking at things is certainly STEAM. And I have asked ChatGPT, I want you to become a STEAM expert, and I want you to tell me, for what I'm looking at right now, I want you to tell me what science you see, what technology you see, what art you see, what math do you see, and so forth, and kind of get a comprehensive view of the object in that fashion. So here's STEAM, but just kind of, again, with the idea of objects and objects radiating disciplines and subjects. So finally, we get to AI, technology. So AI, the question is, can technology assist in the exploration of these radiant objects, which is to say every object that is in the room where you're located now, as well as outside, as well as in your museum, okay, or in a museum that you like? Well, it can be, and I've used it in this fashion. I have a Medium article, which I shared with Alex and Nick, Art Appreciation in the Era of Artificial Intelligence. If you have a moment and want to read that, you can check it out. Let me critique. Give me your critique. So let's talk about this. I really like this. This is part of a museum that's near me, the Kron Museum in Jacksonville, and great painting, 19th century French. And so River Valley at Lourmarin by Paul Camille, and of course, I'm going to say this wrong, but Guigo, I guess, 1867. And so, all right, I have the AI technology in my hand, my smartphone. I want to use that to understand this painting. So the first thing you can kind of do is say, okay, ChatGPT, look at this and describe it for me. And it does a pretty good job, I have to admit. Again, getting back to people, if I had the opportunity to bring along with me, or happen to be, bump into the curators and happen to bump into the director or the deputy director and so forth, I do that, right? I mean, that's what I really want. What this technology does is allows us, if we don't have that opportunity, to do something that helps us and democratize, makes it so that everyone can have the advantage of talking to a curator or someone who is who is part of the education staff, or perhaps collections management, or another area with a museum. This is a bit more extensive. I said, okay, give me something a little bit more captivating, well, a little bit more detailed in terms of the narrative. and again, the computer scientist in me says, okay, I want to see this in terms of computer science. And I found out in computer science, there's a thing called a scene graph. Now, think about it as almost similar to concept map. It's got a bunch of nodes and a bunch of arrows, and they're all tied together. It's sort of like that, but it's structured somewhat differently. And so it did that. It came and it said, it came to me and said, I've looked at that painting, Paul, and here's the scene graph for part of this painting. And the dots mean that it's much more detailed than I'm putting down in the slide. I wanted to become an artist, or I wanted to have an artist talk to me about this painting. And so the way for me to do that was to become the artist. And the way I became the artist was the same way all artists work, which is with technology, is they're the first adopters of technology. When I want to learn about technology of art, I don't go to a computer scientist. Okay, I go to the artists who know about this stuff. And I just went ahead. I think I gave it the initial picture, the painting of Lourmarin, the area within southern France in Provence. And I said, I want to create something like this. And it created 4 different paintings, 4 different images for me. So with this, it's key to again, highlight the role of the artist is the artist understands what is around them by making stuff, by making pictures, by making paintings. And so I wanted to sort of talk to the artist and become the artist when looking at this painting. But again, this is sort of art meets computing and coding. I looked at some waterfalls. Here's some waterfalls. Oh, sorry, I have to go back. I'm going to quickly go back to this. Some waterfalls right here, the lower right. Some waterfalls that are prominent right here. And there's the river. And so these are the waterfalls I'm talking about. And there's some birds up here and some people walking around. So it produced code for me. The ChatGPT produced code to simulate, to give me an understanding of the waterfall, to appreciate the waterfall by making, in the terms of making code or programming. I was interested in the color. The color is definitely a lot of dark. It's a dark palette, this particular painting. And so I asked ChatGPT to give me the color histogram in this space, CMYK, rather than RGB. And it was interesting. It came back with a histogram for me. Now, you probably noticed on the news, or maybe you guys are playing around with this, but there's a ton of stuff going on with video and animation in the AI space. And one of the early tests I did was I took the painting, I entered it into a program called Kyber, and I gave it a prompt like, make the clouds move and show the people walking around. So it did this. Because ultimately, when I looked at that painting, I wanted to dive into it. I wanted to get inside of the painting. What's going on? It's a still frame, right? Which you're looking at there with a lot of paintings. And I wanted to say, well, gee, what would be happening if I entered the painting? And so it came out with a pretty interesting thing. I admit some stuff is just downright weird, which is kind of fascinating. Like the shrubs are disappearing down the limestone face right here. Okay, what's going on with that? But anyway, I kind of enjoyed that. Here's something from another package, another AI package called More Studio. And in here, you can actually see the waterfalls, the water moving, and the people moving around a little bit fast, I have to admit. It's almost like they got jetpacks on them. So I'm gonna, let me go to the next thing. So yeah, let's enter the painting. When we enter the painting, we want to know about the cliffs. They are indeed some limestone cliffs. But what's going on? How did the limestone get there? So this is kind of, if I brought a geologist into the art museum, what would they say? And so this might be what they say, because I told ChatGPT to become the geologist, and gave me some interesting things. The British Isles, the UK, France, that area was a shallow sea, right? And that's why the limestone is there, is because it was underwater millions of years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago. And so it's interesting to sort of see the painting, see the limestone cliffs, have a geologist with me in the sense of ChatGPT, and find out a little bit about the geology. I also wanted to know, well, there's no music, there's no sound. Would the birds make a sound if I entered the painting? Would the water make a sound? Probably. I got to learn a little bit about the Occitan, which is the language of Provence, original language, which is very similar in structure to Catalan in northern Spain, because they're right next to each other, right? And so it's not too surprising that the languages would be so close. So yeah, what do I hear when I go inside the painting? And yeah, some of the scientists in me wanted to say, one of those waterfalls, hey, can we use it to generate power? And so just ignore this, right? but I mean, it was fun to me to sort of play around with it, play around with the interpretation. If I had a physicist with me, or an engineer, a hydraulics engineer, would they be able to comment on the painting? And they would, perhaps in this fashion. So I want to close this talk. I said I'd go for about 40 minutes, and I'm getting there. But I want to close a little bit on kind of what I'm hoping to get across. There are some philosophical roots behind everything I've talked about. There's philosophical roots behind everything, right? But art as experience by John Dewey played a major role. Dewey kind of frames art in a slightly different way than we might be used to. He's saying that as we experience the world in everyday life, in everyday experience, we are engaged with art. So art becomes a kind of a different definition with regard to Dewey. Certainly empiricism, the idea of going outside or going into a museum, looking at what you're describing what you're looking at, phenomenology, constructivism, embodied cognition. Some takeaways. I showed some pictures because these are some of the objects I was fascinated by. Salt shaker and a medieval bridge that's in Exeter, UK. And just to say that I used ChatGPT to help me, and it went in and described a salt shaker. I guess may have heard William Blake's, the world in a grain of sand. Well, this is a world in a grain of salt, which is probably not a good analogy, because grain of salt means you don't pay attention to it. So sorry about that. But no, I paid a lot of attention to this grain of salt and the salt shaker. I saw the computer science in it. I saw the geology in it. I saw some aspects of particle-based materials. And of course, Ralph Goings, who was a photorealistic artist who would paint in a very photorealistic way objects like this. So yes, the art inside this, and of course the design inside of over time is very fascinating. I won't go over all the ways I'm looking at this object, the medieval bridge, but I'm promoting the wonder at direct human experience and the ability to ask questions. Now, this is done generally in the museum culture, and education embraces this in general, which is to say, have people ask questions. And I guess if anything, I'm hoping that I've given you some ideas that there's a lot of questions you can ask about objects, a huge number. So if you want to do deep looking, you're kind of diving a little bit deeper in terms of the kinds of questions that you might ask. Absolutely ask a diverse set of people about what they see and how they see a scene. Again, this is something that a lot of museums are already doing and really well. This third part I hadn't really talked about before, but it's worth mentioning. we're used to disciplines, aren't we? I mean, we're used to subjects. We major in this subject, we minor in that subject, we go into brick buildings where different rooms within the buildings are aligned with different subjects, right? And so we're so used to it, and we're used to it in museums who have different departments. It may be the European department, it might be Mesoamerican department, and we're used to that way of thinking. I get that. This talk has been around, let's turn this inside out and give power to the object, right? And start with the object rather than strictly starting within the circle surrounding a discipline. Okay, so another thing to do is sort of to sort of not think so much on utility or problem solving, kind of like this picture of the salt shaker. First thing we think, am I going to use salt on my meal, right? I want to taste the salt. What's this for? Well, it got a utility. It's for shaking salt out on my food. But it's actually an object that has a whole lot of other interpretations. If we look beyond utility, same thing could be said of computer science. Computer science museum, what's the connection? Well, the natural connection is one where in collections management, you're using the computer, right? And there's a lot of computer work done behind the scenes. So, but what I'm saying in this talk is that that's true and that's very useful, but you can also use computing as a way of looking, as a way of seeing what you're looking at. So yeah, ChatGPT, that's a good thing. Avoid solely linking objects to specific subjects, which is what we all tend to do. We're aligned again by disciplines and subjects. Objects that we see outside in museums, naturally, it's natural for them to radiate many, many subjects, okay? If we choose just one subject or two subjects, we can do that. Nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying AI is this technology that allows us to look to easily find out what we're looking at and how it's connected to multiple subjects. What about for museums? Well, I never worked for a museum, but whenever I go to a new town, I'm always going to the museums, right? I really I like them. You're gold mines because you've got a lot of novel and unique objects. Yes, I can look at the palm tree outside and look at it as a botanist or look at it as a mathematician. But museums, a lot of the objects you have are unique. There's nothing else like that in the world. That's incredible. So there's a lot of potential here. And I'm just going to, of course, metadata is a big word with regard to AI and should be. Are there new forms of metadata in digital collections management? Certainly. And some of the talks within Alex and Nick talking about dreaming of AI talk about this. But also, this subject thing is a great way to potentially connect the museums to schools, because schools are in the business of teaching subjects. But museums are in the business of teaching objects, right? And so if objects can be tied directly to state standards, this is something you can actually have ChatGPT do. It will tell you this state standard for your state on a particular subject that you just pulled out of the object you're looking at. Certainly lifelong learning, visitor engagement. Is this kind of stuff being done now? Well, here's a concept map. This is from North Carolina Museum of Art. They have this online. If you go there, they have 5th grade standards that they're promoting is, hey, let's match the standards to the object. The object's in the museum, the standards are here, we go like that, right? And so concept map is used there. I've also had my students take objects from 3 museums and create concept maps using a different tool. And so that's it. I love any questions. If you have any questions, please contact Alex or contact myself or both of us. We'd be glad to help you and answer any further questions that you may have. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alex.
Thank you, Paul. Really appreciate your perspective on the use of AI and STEAM in museums. We've had some really good comments and questions in the chat. based around those, while people are thinking about or typing up their questions, now that we're in Q&A, what are your thoughts around how to prevent like hallucinations when you're interacting with ChatGPT as an example? Just because LLMs like ChatGPT, don't always have correct information, or that information could be biased. Do you have any thoughts or recommendations on fact checking for even that matter?
I do. Excellent question. And certainly it's important that we verify everything we get. I would say not only just the AI, but pretty much everything, right? We go to trusted news sources, ones that we trust personally. But I'm always fact checking and cross verifying what I see. And certainly with hallucinations in AI, we have to do that. There's no getting around it. We'd like to think that maybe ChatGPT 5.0 will have fewer hallucinations than 4.0. We'll see.
Great. So one question that we also got in the chat was from Heather. Do any of these AI applications include limits or constraints against creating such derivatives or appropriations of work by living artists or work still under copyright?
Excellent question. This is also the copyright question is also relevant to music, especially because there's some new tools that are interesting from that perspective and in terms of copyright. And there are lawsuits obviously out right now. I mean, New York Times is, I guess, a classic one. So the question is, how do we protect work that is copyrighted or images that are copyrighted, right? I think, again, just like the fact checking on news, we have to look at what's there. Are the programs themselves, like ChatGPT, looking at something to determine whether it's a derivative or not? I'm not sure. I don't think it benefits the companies. I'll say, one thing, it certainly doesn't benefit the companies who make AI products to be infringing in copyright. What I will say is this is going to be brand new case law, right? The courts haven't opined yet on this. And until they do opine to say, this is what's important with regard to derivative products versus transformative products, I'm not sure we're in a good position to know whether the AI is going to produce this. Unfortunately, the court system is very slow, and we're going to have to wait for some of this to go through the court system. I will say that we have similar problems even without AI. Somebody may take a picture and then try and sell it, right? Well, this is a big no-no. You can't do that. Or I think there was a case on, was it Warhol recently in the news? And, it may not have anything to do with AI. So this is an ongoing problem, but the questioner is right that copyright is front and center, but unfortunately, it's a big unknown right now.
Real quick, Paul, if you don't mind, just stop screen sharing just because we're still seeing a big black screen.
Sorry.
Yeah, you just gotta stop screen sharing. That's okay.
I want to.
These are some great questions. Thank you, everyone. Some other questions that we've received from folks who registered for this webinar. Paul, I'll give you a minute while you're.
Am I still doing it?
Yeah, here. I can.
If you can X me out, that'd be great. I don't want to leave meeting. That would be bad, wouldn't it? Stop share. Sorry, it's a little red.
You got it. All right, you're good.
Okay, I'm so bad.
Sorry about that, folks. One other question we received from someone who had registered for this webinar was they want to know how applicable the methods, using AI tools for museums with ancient artifacts. Their example was artifacts 7,000 to 1,000 years old, Bronze Age to Rome and Byzantium.
I think the AI tools, there's two answers. One is the AI tools, I think, could be very useful. It's a case-by-case basis of what the part of the thing is. Because of lack of transparency, we don't know exactly what objects, paintings, photographs were used to train some of these models like ChatGPT. We do know, though, that if the purpose is for the museum to be able to have more knowledge and have an authority on a description of the artifacts, they can do that through fine-tuning the model, or adding extra. I mean, people may have heard of GPTs. I've made a few of those, but what you do is you create your own GPT and you upload all of your, say, museum information, photographs, text, and so on. And the GPT will be more likely to be aligned with your those accounts rather than to make it up based on what it was trained on.
Exactly. And I think you'll see a lot less of those hallucinations and incorrect information as well. With that said, I'm wondering, Paul, if you have, because we've talked a lot about prompt engineering on this series, and I know you've written some really great articles, which I plan on including in our AI resources spreadsheet, around your experiences with prompts, and if you have, advice or recommendations for people on how best to structure those prompts to get more, to get better responses from ChatGPT as an example.
Be more detailed rather than less detailed. I guess that would be my, I know that's, sorry, a big general thing, but I mean, there are books, I think now, digital books written on how to do prompting.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I would just say is when we see something and describe it, I mean, if we were to look at an object to say in the room that you're in, and you had to describe it, you can either describe it in detail or describe it very generally. The more general that we are when we prompt, we may not get what we want. And so I think the more detailed, the more English words and descriptors and adjectives that we can use to precisely, I mean, this is a great way of teaching English. I don't know if anybody out there is teaching English composition or composition in any language, but I think you learn, when you're prompting, you learn to be as articulate and as specific as possible rather than general, because you get what you put in there. If it's something general, you're going to get something general, and it may not be what you wanted.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think we are out of questions now. We have a little bit more time in case anybody else has that burning question. In the meantime, we did receive another question from someone who registered. They're wondering about so let me just read it. They believe that humans have a distinct advantage over current AI technology. Yes, that is true. In regards to the contemplation that happens as a result of deep looking. And they mentioned visual thinking strategies as another methodology. So they're wondering if what your thoughts are and around AI surpassing human abilities in the future.
Well, I'm certainly an advocate of VTS, visual thinking strategies. I was taught about it from a gallery owner in Dallas, described it. But in terms of, no, I mean, as humans, we certainly have a lot going for us. And again, that's why I sort of put people at the beginning of the talk, is to say, if I could run around with 100 people, or even 10 people or 2 people to understand something, I would. The AI is a technology to assist us when we don't have that opportunity. Now, I'm not sure I've answered the full question. The other question would be about humans, what is sort of the relative advantage, disadvantage of human versus AI, human intelligence?
I personally don't think we're ever going to be able to, or nor should we move away from human involvement in AI technology and tools. But I didn't want to speak for you, Paul.
Well, I'm all about robotics. No, I'm just kidding, as a joke. I totally agree with you, Alex. I mean, I think that's essential. And I think most of the AI companies, could they be doing what they're doing better? Yes. But I see a future where we're always going to do what we find interesting. And I guess the example I like to pick, just because I like playing chess, is, when Kasparov lost, was it Deep Blue back in the 90s, a major chess tournament, that probably increased the number of humans, the number of people playing chess. It's not like everyone went, oh, well, that's a solved problem. They don't need us anymore. We're not, we're still going to grow, and we're still going to be human and enjoy human tendencies and ways of looking at the world in unique ways. That's not going away. So, and I hope I didn't suggest that something like ChatGPT is going to replace that slide where you see a palm tree and all these diverse human perspectives. We still need that, and we still want that.
Right. Well, I think we can go ahead and wrap it up. Paul, thank you so much for your insightful presentation and discussion. Thank you, everyone, for joining today and asking these really great questions and contributing to the conversation. We will be back later this month with Dr. James Hudson, who will be talking about how extended reality and generative AI have emerged as as transformative tools in preserving and disseminating cultural heritage. If you're interested in registering for that webinar, I'm going to go ahead and put the registration link for that in the chat for everybody. We will also be promoting that again on our social media channels as well. Please follow us on those social media channels if you want to stay current to BPOC activities, including announcements for future webinars. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week. Thank you again, Paul, and we will see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.